The sinking of the Titanic was an event that impacted many different lives from around the world. Losing 1,517 people during the disaster is enough to send chills down anyone's spine. History has given us very few Titanic survivor stories. It is important to preserve the stories in which we have, and therefore I invite you to listen to the stories of the 4 survivors. Miss Elizabeth Lady Dean, also known as Melvina, was only a few months old when she, her parents, and a brother boarded the Titanic at Southampton. They were immigrating to Kansas, where her father had high hopes of opening a tobacconist shop. Her mother, brother, and Melvina were the only ones of her family to survive and to be rescued. Melvina was the last remaining survivor of the Titanic and sadly passed away on May 31st, 2009 at the age of 97. Lillian Asplund was the last American survivor of the sinking of the Titanic. She was 5 years old at the time and she had actual memories of the sinking ship. Her family were third-class passengers when they boarded the Titanic on April 10, 1912. She remembered that the Titanic was very big and it had been just freshly painted. She reportedly said that she did not like the smell of the paint. She sadly passed away on May 6, 2006 at the age of 99. Molly Brown is one of the most famous Titanic survivors. Margaret Tobin Brown was never actually called Molly during her lifetime. The nickname came about from the unsinkable Molly Brown movie and stage musical in the 1960s. Margaret had been travelling in Europe with her daughter Helen when she received word that her grandson was ill. She wanted to get home to America as soon as possible and therefore boarded the RMS Titanic, unaware of the disaster that would soon transpire. When the Titanic struck the iceberg on April 14th, Margaret did her best to help people onto the lifeboats before boarding lifeboat number 6 along with other passengers. One of the ship's quartermasters, Robert Hitchens, was on board. Hitchens refused to turn the lifeboat around to rescue other survivors, claiming that those floating in the water were merely stiffs. Margaret fiercely argued with him before finally seizing control of the rudder and ordering the other passengers to row back towards the wreck. When Hitchens continued to protest, Margaret threatened to throw him overboard, and him, not wanting to try his luck swimming in the ice-cold water, kept his mouth shut. Eventually, lifeboat number 6 was rescued by the Carpathia. Margaret was instrumental in assisting survivors. Before the Carpathia had even arrived in New York, Margaret had raised nearly $10,000 from the first-class passengers to go towards those who had lost everything in the Titanic wreck. Margaret acquired her famous title after delivering a sly quote to reporters soon after the Titanic disaster. "Typical Brown luck, we're unsinkable." Her newfound fame as a Titanic survivor made Margaret an activism effort even more successful, and she even dabbed in acting. Her fortune gradually dwindled and Margaret Tobin Brown died in 1932 at the age of 65. One of the most famous Titanic survivor stories is that of Charles John. During the sinking of the Titanic, John and other chefs were tasked with bringing food and supplies to board the lifeboats. John ventured onto the top deck and began helping people onto the lifeboats and declining to board one himself. Returning to his cabin, he took a drink. John would later emerge to throw the chairs and other items overboard in the hope to give those who fell overboard something to hang on to. Once the Titanic had completely been submerged, John stepped off of the stern of the ship without as much as getting his hair wet. Accounts say that he survived 3 hours in the freezing Atlantic. John survived the Titanic, and his heroism under the influence has gone all but unnoticed over the years. John died at the age of 78 in 1956 in Paterson, New Jersey.